So, Kaya, everyone. My name's Kelly Fliedner. I'm one of the editors of Currents, and I'm based in Perth, UWA, at UWA. So I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of Bulu Budja, who are the traditional owners of the land where the University of Western Australia is situated. I respect their culture, their custodianship, their continued contribution to the life of Bulu, Perth, and the region here. So this includes recognising and respecting sovereignty while working in solidarity towards a treaty and supporting ongoing connections to country. And that means linguistic rights, economic opportunity, and artistic endeavour. So to their elders, past, present, and emerging, I say thanks.
And my name is Jeremy Eaton. I am also one of the editors of Currents, and I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend those respects to any Australian Indigenous and First Nations people here today. And since we have people chiming in from across the country, please feel free to acknowledge the land on which you're situated in the chat. And whilst we are doing this, I think it's important to take a moment to reflect on the ancient, deep, and sustained knowledges underlying Australia's First Nations cultural and social practices, and how integral these are for working with our environment and each other. And I think it's important to keep this in mind as we pursue our various research and creative practices as well. So welcome, everybody, to the launch of Currents, the new interdisciplinary graduate research journal that Kelly and I have been working on for a little less than a year now. We're very excited to share this with you. And this is really an opportunity for us to kind of continue a discussion with a range of people we've been talking about this with for a while, and also to bring new voices into the conversation about what Currents is and what it can be. So just today, Danny Butt, one of our advisory board members, will be saying a few words about the journal, and we'll have 3 readings from some of our wonderful contributors as well: Alex Hedt, Elizabeth Smith, and Madeline Taylor. So, Currents. Currents is an interdisciplinary postgraduate research journal. It's committed to publishing and supporting a broad range of research from arts-based disciplines. When it was initiated, there were kind of a convergent set of circumstances that contributed to it. Some colleagues and I, we had done an open access workshop with ANU, and concurrent to that, the Centre of Visual Arts had created a partnership with the University of Western Australia. And also at the same time, Danny and the incredible Jonathan Graffam had initiated a kind of publishing and journal project that they've been working on. And so since its inception, like all of these convergent factors, there's been a lot of like negotiating, movement, exchanges and flows, and all of these have kind of been built into what Currents is by name and by structure. And it's guided a set of kind of propositions that I think have helped Kelly and I throughout its development. And I think Kelly was maybe going to talk to that a little bit now.
Yeah, so I guess we've spent the last 12 months developing the platform, working out the nuts and bolts, working out how we ourselves will work with each other, like reaching out, trying to connect like over this like space, like this kind of continent. And so we've had like a series, during this time we've kind of had a series of guiding principles, some of which were offered to everyone in the information that accompanied the Eventbrite. So some of those questions, like what should a peer review journal for postgraduate students look like? How does peer review even work in relation to artistic and practice-based research? What are the benefits and difficulties of an interdisciplinary research platform like this? And I mean, we don't have answers necessarily to these yet. The project at the moment is still amorphous, still kind of working itself out. We're only just starting to really have more meaningful and deep conversations with the editorial committee. But I guess there has been this kind of guiding everything has been this like desire to reach out and make sense of being young emerging academics in this like very particular kind of context, which, you know, like emerging over COVID and all of the kind of like unsure and insecure moment that this is, finding kind of camaraderie with like new academics. Like I've loved working with Jeremy over this time. So hopefully we can kind of like get to the conversation a little bit afterwards with people to kind of think about what those answers are. But just to a heads up that this is such a kind of, this is still emerging as a project itself. So hopefully everyone can kind of be a part of what those answers might be. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, and as it's emerged and as we've kind of had contributions in different content, like if you look at it, it's very diverse content, and we mentioned it in our introduction. You know, some of it is more exegetical, practice-led research. Some of it is kind of from a kind of ethnographic kind of methodology and practice, and the kind of feedback they require from different academics is really different. And we've been like learning this through the process, and it's been like a really kind of interesting development as we move through it. But before we introduce Danny, we would like to thank a range of people who have made this possible. I'd like to thank our editorial committee, Paul Boy, Emily Collette, Donna Leon, Emmanuel Rodriguez Chavez, Hannah Spracklin-Hall, and Jonathan Graffam. They've all been great in assisting with the kind of beginnings of the journal, circulating it, and helping us get the brilliant content that we have. I'd particularly really like to thank Jonathan Graffam, who's played an integral role since its inception, a great generous soundboard and supporter of the project since its beginning. And this really did come out of, you know, Vibe South Bank Arts Review, a project that Jono worked on towards the end of last year, and hopefully some of those conversations will be continuing and ongoing.
So, and I'd like to also thank the committee, but also the advisory board, which includes Clarissa Ball, Darren Jorgensen, Tessa Laird, Sue Baker, Danny, and Vicky McInnes, as well as the School of Design here at UWA, where I am a postgrad researcher myself. Thanks so much to Jeremy. Thanks to all of the initial authors, Alex, Paul, Maddie, Chelsea, and Liz, for kind of letting us work with you over this kind of strange and initial period. It's difficult to produce something for a platform that doesn't really exist yet, so thank you. And yeah, thank you also to our Ausland interpreters today, Therese and David, for coming in very short notice. Thanks, Eleanor, for organising this through COVA. Yeah, are they all of the thanks, Jeremy?
No, not all.
Okay, sorry.
I would also like to thank COVA in general, including Vicky McInnes, Sue Baker, Eleanor, who you just said, and Susie Fraser. And I'd also like to thank you, Kelly, for being such a fabulous collaborator throughout the entire period. I think your curiosity and questionings has really helped enrich and expand what Currents is, or what it possibly might have been from the beginning. And I think, yeah, thank you.
Well, I also need to thank Jeremy in particular, because over this last year of working, I had a baby and have my situation has been a little bit more in need of the fluidity that Jeremy has like been totally on board to give me from here. But I also wanted to say, like, it's been such an interesting like project for us two to work on. So Jeremy grew up in Perth, and undergrad at UWA.
Yeah, I started my undergrad at UWA.
Yeah, so, and I grew up in Victoria and did my undergrad and my master's at the University of Melbourne. So it's so interesting on a kind of personal level that we're speaking to these like very different and unique localities, but both of us have quite vested and like emotional as well as like professional attachments to like both of these places. So that's kind of been interesting as we're trying to kind of work out in this like context of COVID and like new online reality of like working online and kind of communicating online all of the time. Like how do we express those like the intricacies of locality online on a new online platform? How do we kind of do that without erasing the kind of specificity of these places? And so those are kind of questions that have been really interesting for both of us. Yeah.
And I suppose now I'd like to introduce Danny Butt, who, like I said, has been there since the beginning. When we've had difficult questions, he's always been available to answer them for us. And he has such a kind of grasp, or like he's been exploring artistic research in universities for quite a while now. And his book, Artistic Research in the Future Academy from 2017 has been, I think, a touchstone for many visual arts researchers. And so I'm really excited to say hello and introduce Danny to say a few words for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the kind introduction. I didn't feel like I've been particularly present or useful during the development of Currents, but it has been really nice to, at a couple of points, have you know, get the sense that that you were you know, really questioning what this could be and what it was about, and it's very exciting to be part of it and to be speaking at this auspicious launch. So yeah, I too should acknowledge that located here on the lands of the Yaluk of the Boonwurrung, part of the unceded sovereign Boonwurrung territories that go over 100 kilometres in both directions from here, up to the South Bank, past the South Bank campus, but then down southeast to what the Europeans named Wilson's Promontory. Acknowledge elders past, present, Boonwurrung and broader Kulin nations, all First People present here today in continuing struggle for self-determination and effective control of lands and resources stolen from them. Also conscious that Dylan Robinson asks us to be specific in our acknowledgements of country, to consider not only the kind of more general protocol of naming, but to think about, in each case, how we are in practice supporting decolonial perspectives or not in our work in the institutions and practices in which we're involved, which inside inside a university which is set up for the maintenance of Western culture and for the essential elimination of Indigenous culture, is always a struggle, and something that I think those of us who are not working from an Indigenous perspective always have to reckon with and question, you know, exactly how we can do that. So I think that's sort of these acknowledgements, which are also appearing in the chat, are important for us to consider with Currents, which, as the editorial notes, conceives of itself in relations to these ocean flows between Indigenous lands. I'm sort of interested as a surfer that some of you may know that the swell that arrives in Victoria sort of begins underneath you know, the Southern Indian Ocean out between South Africa and Western Australia, and then makes its way over here along with the winds that are prominent at this time of year. So a lot of flow from west to east. In the cultural sector as well, the flow from east to west is sometimes more problematic or difficult. It does seem like there's a asymmetry there that I remember as someone who grew up in Queensland, discussing with Perth friends that, you know, the sense of inevitability that somehow everyone would end up moving to Melbourne or Sydney, and you know, wondering that if in this current you know, online environment we can equalize some of those flows somehow, or the movement between places. Also between disciplines. But before the days of, I was thinking about currents and how before the days of the impact factor and the citation index, journals in the arts were much like artist-run initiatives or, you know, record labels. You know, if you hear oral histories of journals that were sort of set up in the 1970s through to the 1990s, you know, they're journals like Critical Inquiry, which now seem like they just have all these super professors being kind of publishing in them. They really are just starting from young scholars trying to work out what is going on today and trying to talk to what is going on today in a way that makes sense for them and their discipline. So I feel that, you know, currents is very much in that kind of mode to me. I can sense a new way of things being conceived, and also a lot of potential for that to continue into the future. You know, slightly differently than like working with Jono on Vibe last year, where we're really showcasing what was happening in the faculty of Fine Arts and Music. I've had the sense that with the COVA and UWA partnership, that Currents has always had a sense of a larger conversation which is going on, that's not just in any one institution either, but perhaps speaks more generally to the shared and collective situation of graduate researchers in the creative arts and the shared dialogues, pressures, but also opportunities that are taking shape. So in that sense, to me, you know, I can foresee Currents having not just a national but potentially international impact with how it's working. And I think as you mentioned, Jeremy and Kelly, you know, an important factor in artistic research and journals that support it are about finding appropriate quality assurance mechanisms that make sense for the disciplines we're engaged in. Of course, double-blind peer review that's common in the sciences is not very well connected to the forms of critique and development that we understand in the arts. And I think seeing you work through how to find more specific and engaged ways of helping people develop their contributions and presenting them, that kind of aesthetic and scholarly midwifery that's there is really present in the bringing to life of the first issue. I think you can really see the effects of that work, even if I know a lot of it is behind the scenes. And to me, that's a very exciting part of what Currents is doing. Obviously, reviewers have also done a lot of work, I'm sure, but I'd also say it looks very handsome, and which is important for a journal in the visual arts, of course. And I like the easy access to citations and EPUB and PDF formats, even if the color does remind me of my iPhone notes, and I keep wanting to type into it like shopping list or things like that while I was reading. And I guess I also just wanted to just make mention of the contributions, which I think, you know, really struck me as being quite, you taking these kind of classic disciplinary concerns, but really trying to address things that are very important in contemporary practice. So Alex Het's access and aesthetics, cultural considerations in interpreting music and theatre for Australia's deaf community, that really gave me the sense of the time-honoured problematics of differential politics of making and viewing, and how staging politics in production is not the same as those politics, how those politics take shape in the space of reception or in an audience. Classical Kantian concerns, but like when given this new space of access and what access is, I think is really, opened up really interesting questions. Madeline Taylor's belonging backstage put me in mind of feminist science studies from the 1990s that I really loved, like Donna Haraway and Sharon Treweek, etc. Really taking the black box of theatre and opening up the hidden power relations that are going on in the background in I think a really concrete way, showing us how those power relations actually are affecting the whole scenario of what's being produced. The enduring masculinities in the genres of policing there were also palpable. Elizabeth Smith's piece on catching archive fever, delving into August Sanders' archive. Derrida's essay is a classic of mine. I spent a whole chapter on archives in my own doctoral work, and so I was really impressed by the piece. And I guess particularly one thing it made me think about is how there's an essay by Derrida called Moklos, where he talks about how the boundaries between the university and non-university research is becoming radically disrupted by technology due to the constitution of data banks outside the university. And then he says, quote, either for reasons of structure or from its attachment to old representations, the university cannot avail itself of certain kinds of research or operate within them or transmit them. And he first wrote this in the 1980s. So I think we can clearly understand that now the institutional crisis that's facing the university is that its libraries are not the ideal form of archive, and that the university has to kind of find other ways of working with the archive if it's going to kind of continue to be a space of teaching and learning and research. And I feel like the way that Elizabeth talked about in Sanders' projects, this kind of formatting of the seriality of the portraits, saying, quote, that this repetitiveness in Sanders' project signals a construction around a common theme and a rhythm of accumulation of knowledge. That speaks to me about something very important about artistic research and how its kind of knowledge forms are perhaps different than standard university-based knowledge, and how they're also able to be proposed by artists in that singular format. I guess the last piece, Chelsea Kuhn's Space, Time and Excessive Performances of Endurance. The level of commitment in the practice is really mirrored in the level of commitment in theoretical exploration. And to me, this really highlights just how this embodiment being understood in the twin spaces of a writing practice and in a performance practice can be kind of brought together into a really interesting article. I think that the way that Chelsea articulates how the mode of excessiveness creates transformation in the self and the environment really gets to the heart of artistic research. She notes that in every instance when an adaptation is necessitated, regardless of the scale, its result demands a reorientation to the space of the performance. And that puts me in mind of Lauren Ballant's identification of politics as a space of proprioception. So where we you know, by actually doing something, by walking. We're also sensing in some way as well. Yeah, that was I think that's quite appropriate for this issue. I feel like maybe Currents is taking its baby steps today and finding its way of how to wander around and bump into things and start to do new things. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the development. So hope everyone's going to give the issue a good read. It's very stimulating. Share it around, and you know, while Jeremy and Kelly, you've been working from COVA and UWA, I understand there are other discussions and partnerships that can be brought into play in Currents. So it, like any new being brought into the world, it is its own thing that will start to do things different than what you as parents want it to do, and that's very exciting. And so I think with that, I'll just take on the ceremonial role, and without having done any of the work, happily declare the first issue of Currents launched. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks so much, Danny. I mean, before we move on, just thinking about a couple of like notes that Danny had made. So thinking about how do we think about quality assurance? Like, what is peer review in the context of this? Such an important question. And also that we are online. So the context of this academic research is open access. So it's kind of accessible to a different kind of audience. So just trying to reimagine what the relationships between the academy and industry can be because of this like opening up of the archive, like you were saying. So those things are so kind of important for us in this initial conversation, like getting the online platform kind of happening. And one important note to remember is that the issues that we're working on will be rolling out over the year. So issue 1 is essentially 2020, and we will have a couple of, we will have some more items that we'll publish before the end of the year. And then issue 2 will be 2021. And we'll kind of work within the flexibility of online publishing and kind of roll out items over the year. So I'm not quite sure how we will signpost conversations at particular points, but maybe we'll have like celebrations at the end of an issue or like a wrap up of issues. So we're still working out how we'll kind of do that. Anything else, Jeremy?
Indicative of that process, this morning we made live or published Paul Boy's contribution to issue 1. So, I mean, Danny did such beautiful acknowledgements of each of the contributions so far. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Paul and his great essay, The Inhuman Condition, Jean-Francois Lyotard's Immaterial and Technological Sublime. It's a, you know, a theoretical take on an exhibition that took place in the 80s, curated by Thierry Chaput and Jean-Francois Lyotard. And Paul creates a like amazing route through Lyotard's theory and this exhibition to kind of intervene into post-humanist theoretical studies to kind of provide, I suppose, an alternative lineage to that study. And yeah, I feel really thankful to all of the authors for their incredibly thoughtful and engaging takes on their thematics. Even reviewers' feedback was, you know, often strikingly positive about how beneficial the critical takes on the particular subjects that each of the authors were taking on throughout the process. And I think that's really an exciting thing for us and hopefully for the contributing authors as well. But I'm conscious of time, so maybe we should get on to some readings. I would like to introduce Alex Hedt, one of our authors. Alex is studying Masters of Music, or just submitted, I believe, ethnomusicology at the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music. Alex has been researching and writing about the history of musical practice in the Victorian deaf community from 1884 to the present day, and is interested in an ethnographic exploration of musical engagement amongst deaf Australians. I will hand you over to Alex to read briefly from her contribution to our issue. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Kelly, to you both for seeing this through to publication. I am ensconced in my cushioned seat in a darkened theatre in Melbourne's Arts Centre as text scrolls up the projector screen in front and the familiar strains of Alsos Black Zarathustra blare from the speakers. But this is no sci-fi film screening. Strauss yields to funk and a silver-clad figure appears on screen. This is deaf performer Asphyxia, playing the motherboard, who allows for communications between all systems and life forms by signing the songs in Australian Sign Language or Auslan. The screen flashes rhythmically, 1, 2, 3, 4, and rock band leaps into action below. The motherboard disappears, and a woman standing amongst the band begins to sign. As its opening sequence illustrates, the legend of Queen Kong Episode 2, Queen Kong in Outer Space, hereafter Queen Kong, belongs to a growing body of Australian works in what Bree Hadley calls a disability theatre ecology, a spectrum of practice which seeks to include deaf and disabled people in a variety of ways. Queen Kong moves Auslan interpretation from its historical place side of stage into the spotlight, embedding it into the fabric of the performance. Asphyxia's role as a conduit of communication, meanwhile, challenges popular conceptions of deafness as a hearing and communication deficit. By communicating in her preferred language, Auslan, she showcases the cultural linguistic identity of the deaf community. Furthermore, the work as a whole demonstrates how, as Carrie Sandal explains, the phenomenology of deafness can be used to inform and create art. An absent plot, a half-ape protagonist, nonsensical lyrics, and jumble of musical genres combine to confront hearing audiences with the same confusion that deaf people face daily. The result makes good on the promise of disability arts to wreak havoc, to disrupt, and be loud and unruly. But what would a deaf attendee make of it? In making the case for disability arts, Sandal laments the relative paucity of theatre artists who, I quote, think about ways to disperse language into space through multiple channels. Queen Kong displays evidence of this thinking, conveying linguistic and musical materials not only through Auslan interpretation, but also by visual and textual means. One method is the manipulation of Asphyxia's image on the projector display, used to represent texture. As different parts enter, her image multiplies and the screen also pulses to indicate tempo changes. The concept of music for its own sake in Queen Kong is further reinforced through written descriptions of genre and musical terminology in both the program or zine and on-screen captioning. Both employ genre descriptions bordering on the nonsensical, as in the song Truck Stop, which describes driving surf pop with a funk groove chorus and loony bop B section. Whilst Hadley suggests that communicating information across multiple modes cultivates awareness of one's fellow spectators, I question how true this might be for deaf audiences in this context. The visual elements, though interesting, have no inherent connection with the musical material. And furthermore, the written musical technology excludes by assuming prior musical knowledge beyond even many hearing people. As Queen Kong deliberately fosters a sense of chaos, perhaps nobody is meant to understand this terminology. Indeed, it could be read as a commentary on Asphyxia's own inability to understand musical jargon. However, this meta-reflective subtext could easily be lost on a deaf audience member who might assume that the hearing people around them do understand what's happening. And so while the use of multiple channels might challenge hearing audiences, it actually does little to enhance deaf access. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was really great. And you can go to the website currentsjournal.net to read the rest of Alex's paper and the rest of the contributions that we have for issue 1 thus far.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. It's such an important piece. Yeah. So I'm introducing Elizabeth Smith. So Liz is a recent UWA graduate receiving honours in art history in 2019. So like Danny said before, Liz's text that she submitted to Currents is a reading of Derrida's Archive Fever in the context of how contemporary institutions and private collections like MoMA, or there's some Sanders actually in the NGV as well, but MoMA, who has like a larger collection, are collecting, archiving and interpreting the work of photographer August Sander and his large archival project, People of the 20th Century. So this text is an edited version of Liz's honours thesis, and it was particularly meaningful for me being the editor for Currents to see this. I taught Liz, we had an art writing seminar subject last year, so I saw the very early beginnings of the research and kind of workshopping conversation around Sanders from quite early on, and then like seeing it through this now peer-reviewed published stage. So thanks so much, Liz, for being a part of that. No worries. Yeah, okay, cool, thanks.
So I guess hello. So I'm reading a part of my text about sort of when people of the 20th century sort of moves from Xander's, after Xander dies, once it moves to his family and to other institutions. So hopefully it doesn't go for too long, but here we go. Xander, as first archon or archivist, established people of the 20th century according to his vision for a collection of portrait photographs depicting types, illustrating the changing times. His studio, the Archion, is where the project was organised. The Archion is not a fixed location, but it is the residence at which Xander worked in to construct people of the 20th century throughout his career. The Archion marks this institutional passage from the private to the public, which does not always mean from the secret to the non-secret. It marks where the photographs of The Face of Our Time and Deutschen Spiegel, publications released by Xander during his lifetime, have passed through for public consumption. However, upon Xander's death, the Archion passed on to another institution, his family, who initially took on the role of interpreting and safeguarding his visual and written documents. The family adopted Xander's organising principles for the people of the 20th century as they sought to complete and publish his project in its entirety, thereby opening it to the public. Their actions, however, also opened the archive up to be unravelled now it was no longer in Xander's hands. In 1973, Xander's son Gunther Xander published Men Without Masks, Faces of Germany, 1910 to 1938, a selection of 230 portraits taken by his father between those years. This book does not have the express purpose of reconstructing people of the 20th century, rather it is an introduction to Xander, his life and his career. Instead of the 7 volumes as outlined by Xander, Gunther Xander distributed the 230 photographs into 5 categories: archetypes, country folk, trades, classes and professions, life and transience. While Gunther Xander attempted to organise each category into a portfolio structure, he only managed this in 2 of the categories. There is no specified number in each category, and one contains 27 and the other contains 59. Gunther Xander prefaces each category with the labels of the portraits included in that category, but those labels are not included with the photographs. This suggests that the reader will have the labels as a guide, but be able to pick out the different types simply by looking at the portraits. The photographs are presented on different scales. Some share a page, others are assigned their own page, while yet others spread across 2 pages. This messy arrangement seems completely arbitrary across each category, yet it also suggests a greater importance to some images than others, something which would have run contrary to the seriality and equal status implied in Xander's original conception. As a result, the opportunity for order is severely diminished. Furthermore, Gunther Xander was the first to identify and name Xander's sitters, restoring the portrayed to an individual state and reducing their status as type. This was, of course, easiest to achieve in the case of publicly known figures, such as writers, musicians, or artists. This was, of course, easiest to achieve in the case of publicly known figures, such as writers, musicians, or artists, such as Willy Bongard and Gottfried Brockman, painters, who Xander captured himself as bohemians in Face of Our Time and People of the 20th Century, but Gunther Xander labels the same portrait the painters Gottfried Brockman and Willy Bongard in his edition, so he exposes his father's work to an investigative process in which individuals stand in as an overarching representative for explaining Xander's People of the 20th Century as a whole, and thereby significantly weakens its serial structure. which loses necessity and significance. Overall, Günther Zander's early reconstruction of people of the 20th century is not easily accessible, as it leaves the viewer overwhelmed with content and few organizing prompts. The whole project, one might argue, is rendered unstable here. So we can sort of think of Günther Zander as another archon or archivist who not only had the power to guard Zander's documents, he also had the right to interpret them for the operation of a system of law. In other words, Günther Zander made a decision for how Zander's work was to be read by the public. In 1992, Zander's entire oeuvre was purchased by the SK Stiftung Kultur der Sparkasse Köln-Bonn, a cultural foundation located in Cologne. As caretaker of the archive, it is responsible for the academic research of Zander's work and ensuring its public accessibility and posterity, lending works to museums and managing reproduction rights and publications. The foundation contains the largest and most complete collection of Zander's archive as a whole. In 2002, Susanne Langer, director of the photography collection of the Stiftung Kultur, Gabriel Konrad Scholl, a research associate for the photographic collection, and Zander's grandson, Gerhard Zander, published the next version of People of the 20th Century. This is the largest reconstruction, containing 619 portraits, and it claims to be the most faithful to Zander's intentions, basing itself on careful research of his annotations on photographs and other written notes. It presents the portraits in 45 portfolios, however, the 7 categories are themselves divided into 7 separate volumes. The layout of the edition is outlined in the preface to the 7 volumes. Editor Susanne Langer justifies that by consulting Zander's annotations, this edition was able to assign over 200 negatives unequivocally to the project. The images were cropped on the basis of the existing original photographs to preserve the authentic interpretation of the image as laid down by Zander's own cropping. And finally, they chose to match the layout of the publication Face of Our Time, which was published by Zander himself in 1929, which allows the viewer to see each image as a separate image first of all, and then as part of a pictorial continuum. Langer justifies this on the grounds that Zander's photographs embody an individual expressiveness as well as a typological quality. The Cologne edition also includes the annotations that Zander made on some of his portraits at the beginning of each volume. These decisions to use Zander's annotations and previous publications as a guide justify their aim to recreate the project as authentically as possible, according to Zander's vision. However, individual names are again restored to the sitters, just like his son did, and this goes against Zander's intentions and subsequently disturbs this claim to authenticity. Furthermore, giving the reader access to Zander's notes means information is layered onto some individual photographs and thereby disrupts their seriality as equal parts to a larger whole. While these discrepancies exist, this edition is also aimed to further scholarship, allowing others who might not normally be able to visit the Zander archive to conduct research on the project. Ultimately, in this publication and Günther Zander's, these editions alter the nature of the project overall, giving the reader access to information that Zander would likely not have used if he had completed the project himself, exposing what Derrida calls a secret to its order, effectively changing the function of the archive from Zander's vision. They are interpreting Zander's work, though, and giving it a system under which it could operate legibly and arguably legitimately. These efforts to publish the archive are also accompanied by efforts to curate the archive undertaken by institutions around the world. As Derrida indicates in his text, and as the multiple reconstructions of Zander's project by his family or the Stiftung Kultur illustrate, there is a feverish desire for the archive. Furthermore, as Carolyn Steedman elucidates in her article, this desire is not only in interpreting, operating or using the archive, but also in owning it. Currently, Zander's work is held in about 24 collections. As a result, it now has as many archions or residences where his work is interpreted and used by several different archivists. Each of these 24 collections house anywhere upwards of 2 photographs from people of the 20th century or 200. Each collection is attracted to what could be termed a canonical group of Zander photographs that invariably includes images of the archetypal Germans or the Westerwald farmers. Yet, as a result, the original order of the people of the 20th century is often foregone for a collection of highlights which illustrates Zander's career and artistic practice, and it negates that people of the 20th century was to be considered as a serial project in which patterns and types take precedence and which formed a distinct unit in Zander's oeuvre. It is at best replaced with a new kind of seriality, one which conforms to a particular collection. People of the 20th century as a whole body of work is ontologically different across all institutions, meaning the way that viewers relate to these images is determined by the form they assume in various publications or exhibitions of his work, in which photographs are ordered by editors, publishers, and curators. Furthermore, the size of exhibition venues, as much as their collection holdings or loan budgets, usually condition such presentation of Zander's project. Another example of how the archive is curated and how viewers relate differently to Zander's archive is through the variation in titles of the photographs. Catherine Tubb highlights this variation in titles through the photograph of circus workers drinking tea. In the London Tate collection, the photograph is entitled Circus Workers, yet the MoMA collection calls it Indian Man and German Woman. These variations highlight how different collections interpret Xander's photographs and change how the public relate to Xander's images, emphasizing the unrooted and unstable nature of people of the 20th century as it stands today. Similarly, scholarship has frequently pointed out discrepancies contained within the overall project, honing in on the tendency of Xander's types to move around or to become what Miranda Wallace in her text, August Xander's Photographic Archive, Fables of the Reconstruction, has termed typologically mobile. For example, Austrian artist and writer Raoul Hausmann is one of those mobile figures. He appears in various roles throughout the project as a dancer, as an inventor and Dadaist, and once more standing between two women identified as Hedwig Mankiewicz and Vera Boydor in parenthesis and entitled The Dadaist Raoul Hausmann. This last portrait is extremely problematic for the order of the types that Xander was constructing. It raises the question of whether Hausmann is cast in his role as a man, or if his role is as he, Raoul Hausmann, as he is placed in a portfolio which looks specifically at these relationships between woman and man. The inclusion of Hausmann's individual name in the title of the project upsets the transition to a type, as it demonstrates his individuality rather than his gender. This problematizes his place within the archive as an identifiable type, destabilizing the technique of repetition, which is supposed to stabilize the project. And pointing out these discrepancies, recent scholarship destroys the very fabric of the archive to construct order. These collecting and research practices have left people of the 20th century not only fragmented, but open to considerable variation and interpretation by multiple cultural environments who decide which of Xander's photographs justify or authenticate a particular experience of his work as a whole. As a result, the original authority of people of the 20th century is lost, as its organizing principles of seriality, which helped to stabilize Xander's project, no longer function in these environments. As Derrida puts it, what is no longer archived in the same way is no longer lived in the same way. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. It's such a great inclusion, and Danny kind of mentioned all of the reasons why it's such a great inclusion for this issue in particular. The first one, thinking about archives, thinking about how we as curators, editors, caretakers of the archive kind of work on the internet in this new kind of situation. So thank you so much. And yeah, so you can read it on Currents at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. Like, the detail of the analysis going through so many institutional variations or historical takes on Xander's work was like really remarkable to move through and encounter, and like demonstrated that kind of flexibility of, I don't know, I suppose archival practice, or how much license institutions take across the span of somebody's practice. So I will introduce Madeline Taylor, our third and final reader. Madeline is currently doing the Doctor of Philosophy at the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music Theatre, University of Melbourne, and her research focuses on contemporary costume practice, technical theatre's interpersonal dynamics, and fashion performance. Madeline's contribution belonging backstage, us and them in production, I suppose on many years of working in theatre on technical teams, and highlights the kind of, I suppose, the political delineations that occur within that space. I'll hand you over to Maddie.
Thank you, Jeremy. And so great to be here, and also so great to be part of this new endeavour. So this article looks at a few of the ways in which belonging is negotiated and displayed in live performance technical teams in mainstage theatre, and it applies sociological theories to current practice. Representations of technicians in both academy and industry is vital, as it validates the efforts of a myriad of people whose self-identity is intrinsically tied to their work. To work in theatre is to be theatre, and for many the job becomes synonymous with their identity. However, this identification is sometimes predicated on the process of inclusion and exclusion, in which divisive lines are drawn between technical and creative teams. And this division occurs in spite of the fact that theatre is consistently posited as inherently collaborative, reliant on multiple people and skill sets. My article focuses on the benefits and issues that arise in negotiating these hierarchies, and what might be done by all working in theatre to resolve them. Social anthropologist Joanna Pfaff-Zanecka suggests that belonging is an emotionally charged social location. This nexus of feeling, place and community seems to connect with how we talk about theatre as both a specific place meant to prompt reaction and reflection, and an amorphous activity entirely reliant on people. Belonging to theatre is individually felt and embodied while collectively negotiated and performed. And one of the first observable commodities of this is the uniform. To be a technician is to wear black. Ostensibly born out of practical considerations, this practice ensures that as little as possible of the technician is visible to the audience while they stand in the wings or in the grid. However, the history of this custom, the kinds of black clothes that make up the uniform, and the way in which they are worn are all dense with meaning. One reason for a uniform of black is a literal desire to erase the body and the visible labour of technicians. Performance theorist Alice Rayner suggests that this appropriation of Kabuki's sign of invisibility is due to the belief that the erasure perpetuates the theatrical illusion, or the magic of theatre. While the practice of wearing black is relatively recent, adherence and prior knowledge of this backstage norm is initial evidence of a belonging for any new crew member. Conformity not only establishes their understanding of the current theatre practice, but also their tacit acceptance of conventions regarding hierarchy, role, and professional aspiration. Belonging backstage not only applies to the group, but also to the space. Patrice Parvis suggests that there's a cognitive circle of attention that divides onstage and backstage spaces. I suggest that backstage belonging is most apparent in its obverse, where technical staff are on stage where they don't belong. This is efficiently evidenced by the fact that an allowance is paid to technical staff if they're required to be visible on stage. And more conceptually, many productions use technical staff on stage to experiment and play with theatre conventions. Making the crew part of the action or scenery in this way is considered problematic by Rayner, as it others the technician and all of those off stage they represent, reiterating the in-group comparative divide between technicians and artists. The consciousness that the stage is the wrong place for the technicians is visible in the practices of dressers and other crew in Phantom of the Opera, which sees them carefully choreographing and contorting their bodies behind set pieces to ensure invisibility after scenery and costume changes. This contortion not only evidences the understanding that they do not belong on stage, but also a collective adherence to the understanding of expected behaviours. So membership of the technical team is performed and negotiated through a variety of processes. I've talked about two here, but there's others such as language and kind of other behaviours, which you can read about in my article. And what I will talk to further in that is how these practices are important for individual esteem and feelings of belonging, both useful and detrimental to the theatre product. So go read.
Thank you so much, Maddie. That was so great.
Thank you.
I am very conscious of time, so thank you so much to all of our authors and Danny Butt as well for your contributions to today. If anybody has any questions for us, please feel free to put them in the chat or for the authors, and we might be able to go on for a few more minutes. And then beyond that, we may have to finish up for the day. But please, yes, if you have any questions, let us know.
Yeah, forever the problem going over time. Sorry, everyone. Yeah, and I guess just to stress again that this is an amorphous project, and we're hoping that you know, both Jeremy and I are early researchers ourselves, and this is a kind of learning process for the both of us to set up a journal like this, and having that kind of autonomy, like being a part of the intended audience, has been really great experience. So I'm really excited to see where it kind of goes and develops, and the kinds of like collaborative projects we can do next year, and how we might continue the collaboration between UWA and Uni Mel, but also kind of extrapolate out and think about including other organizations or postgraduate students from other places. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of scope to develop and for things to shift as we go. And we're always open to contribution, because essentially, you're our audience and the people we want to be engaging with. So if anybody does have any feedback or anything at any point, feel free to get in touch with Kelly and myself about that, and we're always happy to have a conversation. And if you have ideas for submissions, you can always get in touch with us too and discuss that, because we're open to really experimental approaches to this as well. The digital platform allows for such a broad range of types of contributions, and, you know, like that process of working things out as we go. If we get a video submission, or I don't know, something even more out there, working out how to integrate peer review into that is kind of an interesting challenge and thing to negotiate as well. And many thanks to all of the lovely words from everyone.
Yeah, thanks for all of the encouragement. Yeah, so I can't say any questions there. I just say heaps of praise, so thank you. And goodbye to everyone who has to run away to marking meetings and other things. And run away, I mean like just transfer Zoom windows, but yeah. Okay, cool. Maybe we should wrap it up.
Yeah.
Jeremy, thank you to all of our readers. Thank you to those who have been part of this initial issue.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. See you soon.